Hey folks, welcome to the first video of our epic journey through AP US history. We are about to combine 9 mind maps into 9 units, organizing all the core and systematic knowledge you need to ace this course. Think of it as putting together a giant puzzle, but way cooler because it's history. Each unit will have a bunch of themes, kind of like the highlights reel of an action-packed movie. These themes are the biggest, baddest events and characteristics of each period. Our mind maps are loaded with text, images, and especially maps. We've got historical images, comparison tables, and all the good stuff to make history come alive. I'll be using these visuals to turn dry facts into a lively story of America's past. Alright, Unit 1. Let's kick this off in the year 1491. Yep, that's right, the year before Columbus got lost and found the New World with a little help from his friends, the Spanish monarchy. Soon after, the Portuguese, French, Dutch, and English all jumped onto the bandwagon, starting their own colonial adventures. Our unit wraps up in 1607 when Jamestown, the first permanent English colony, was established. Jamestown is like the pilot episode of British colonial rule in North America, giving us a sneak peek at what's coming up in Unit 2 with the 13 British colonies. Now, let's briefly break it down into the 3 main topics of this first unit. First up, we'll explore Native American societies before the Europeans crashed the party. So imagine you were hosting a peaceful backyard BBQ and then some unexpected guests showed up, rearranging your lawn furniture and misunderstanding your customs. Spoiler alert, these differences led to some major misunderstandings and conflicts. Next, we'll look at the Europeans' reasons for trekking across the Atlantic. What made them leave their cozy homes, their tea, and their crumpets for a risky journey into the great unknown? So were they bored? Was it wanderlust? Or just a really bad case of FOMO? And once they got there, what did they do? Each country had its own playbook with plenty of plot twists. Lastly, we'll analyze the impact of colonization. This is where it got really juicy. We'll explore the complex relationships between Native Americans and the various European powers, the multifaceted Columbian exchange, the forced contributions of Africans to the Americas, and how colonization reshaped Europe itself. Before we dive into the key content of Unit 1, let's talk geography. Yep, geography, the unsung hero that's been pulling the strings behind the scenes of history like a grand puppeteer. For instance, the Appalachian Mountains once acted like a massive do not enter sign for British colonists itching to head west. It's like Mother Nature's way of saying, stay in your lane, colonists. We'll get into that juicy detail later. So, let's rewind the clock and combine this epic timeline with the ancient geological history of Earth to get cozy with the geographical elements of modern US territory. First off, the Appalachian Mountains. These bad boys are among the oldest mountains on Earth. 200 million years ago, we had Pangaea. the supercontinent that included almost all the land masses on Earth. Imagine a massive jigsaw puzzle that decided to split up and never get back together. It's like the ultimate breakup story. About 70 million years ago, the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific coast ranges popped up, like Earth was getting a whole new set of teeth. Fun fact, Yellowstone National Park is in the Rockies. So it's like the granddaddy of all parks. Then we have the Canadian Shield around Hudson Bay, which might be the oldest part of North America to rise above sea level. Think of it as the senior citizen of the continent, complete with some of the oldest rocks on Earth. Glacial action on the Canadian Shield was like nature's version of extreme home makeover, sculpting the landscape with a frozen chisel. The Great Lakes, they are the magnum opus of this ice artistry. Speaking of glaciers, let's fast forward to the Ice Ages, which lasted from 2.6 million to about 10,000 years ago. Yes, that's a long time, even longer than your last Zoom meeting. The earliest humans reached the Americas during the tail end of this chilly period, either by crossing the Bering land bridge from Siberia or cruising along the coastline in primitive boats. Once here, they went on a hunting spree that, combined with the warming climate, drove many large animals to extinction. By 7000 BCE, mammoths, mastodons, and ancient horses were history, literally. Oh, and about those horses you see today in America, they are the ultimate comeback story. They were reintroduced from other continents in the last 500 years and are basically the immigrant workers of the animal kingdom. Picture this, Native Americans looking out over the majestic mountains, vast lakes, and the mighty Mississippi River. This river wasn't just a waterway, it was the backbone of America's agricultural and transportation systems. It was like the superhighway of its time without the traffic jams. Moving west, we hit the Great Plains. The Great Plains are flat, grassy, and perfect for farming and cattle. By the 1930s, turned it into a dust bowl horror show with droughts and dust storms wreaking havoc. It was like Mother Nature's way of saying, I'm taking a break from being nice. Then there's the Great Basin, with scorching summers and freezing winters. It's like Mother Nature couldn't decide which extreme she liked more. Gold rush prospectors had to cross this harsh land in the mid-1800s, facing a real-life survival challenge. It was like Survivor, Gold Rush edition, and many didn't make it. Climate is a big player in the historical drama. The northeastern and central western U.S. enjoy a temperate continental climate. Think of it as weather on cruise control. But head to the Great Plains, and inland west, and you are in sparse vegetation territory, with grasslands and shrubs being the main attraction. The northern Pacific coast, like Washington State, gets a temperate maritime climate with rain galore. If you like rain, you feel like you've hit the jackpot. California's coast is warm with rainy winters and dry summers, pretty much paradise for weather enthusiasts. Meanwhile, the southeastern U.S. basks in warmth and abundant rainfall year-round, resulting in lush vegetation. It's like living in a greenhouse, minus the actual glass walls. Temperature varies with latitude, colder up north and warmer down south. Mountains like the Rockies and Appalachians are cool year-round at the top thanks to high elevation. The Great Plains and Great Basin are like moody teenagers swinging between hot summers and cold winters, with the basin also featuring extreme day-night temperature differences. Rainfall. The eastern U.S. is generally well-watered, especially the southeast. It's like the region is constantly getting a spa treatment. The Midwest sees rainfall taper off as you move west, which is like Mother Nature slowly turning off the faucet. The West Coast, particularly the Pacific Northwest, is a winter wonderland of rain. California stands out with its raining winters and dry summers. Now, let's talk about some wild weather phenomena. First up, hurricanes. These beastly storms mainly batter the southeastern coast. Florida and Louisiana get hit hard. Remember Hurricane Katrina in 2005? That storm was like the ultimate party crasher, causing over 1,000 deaths and forcing more than 1 million people to evacuate. The response, or lack thereof, led to major reforms in disaster management. It was like the government had to retake a crash course in what to do and what not to do during a hurricane. Next, I'd like to mention tornadoes. Tornado Alley in the Midwest and southern U.S. is the tornado capital of the world. These twisters were like the Narnias of weather, smaller but incredibly destructive. They mostly show up in spring and early summer. And don't forget droughts. The western U.S., particularly California and Nevada, often faces severe droughts, impacting agriculture and water resources big time. Imagine planting your garden, but Mother Nature decides to play a cruel joke and turn off the sprinkler for years. So, use the maps we are exploring to understand the geographical and climatic factors at play. If there's anything that's written in the stars for human history, it's geography and climate. Nature's handiwork in shaping the land and climate has had a massive impact on human life and history. When studying, always check the locations of historical events and think about how the geography and climate influenced those events. Analyze maps closely, including legends and notes, to see the connections between natural features and historical processes. It's like reading the secret diary of Mother Earth, and trust me, it's full of juicy details. Alright, folks, buckle up because we are diving into the first theme of Unit 1, how Native Americans adapted to and transformed the environment before Europeans crashed the party in 1492. Picture this, Native Americans were the original DIY experts. Due to the diverse climate and geography, they had a variety of production methods and resource dependencies. Let's start with the agriculture hotspots. It's like a historical episode of Top Chef, but with more corn and fewer judges. First up, maize, the superstar of Native American agriculture. Maize, or as we know it, corn, made its way north from Mexico to the southwestern U.S. The Pueblo people in the southwest were like the ancient architects, building permanent stone and adobe structures around 700 CE. These guys weren't just playing with Lego, they were constructing skyscrapers of their time. These structures housed large populations, and to expand maize cultivation, they built elaborate irrigation systems. Besides maize, they grew beans, squashes, and sunflowers, basically the original organic farmers. So imagine the Pueblo people chilling in their adobe homes, munching on their farm-to-table veggies and feeling pretty cool about their sustainable living. Now let's move to the Great Lakes region. The Native Americans here were influenced by the plains, fertile soil, and warm, humid summers, making it a perfect spot for agriculture and settled villages. The Iroquois in New York State were rock stars of democracy, forming the Iroquois Confederacy. This highly democratic setup helped them promote peace and cooperation among various nations. Fun fact, the Iroquois didn't call themselves that. It was a name given by their enemies. They called themselves Haudenosaunee, meaning people of the longhouse. These longhouses were like the original apartment complexes, ranging from 2.4 meters to 61 meters in length, housing several related families. Picture a cozy, extended family sleepover that never ends. Moving south, cultural groups like the Creeks and Cherokees in the southeast enjoyed a warm climate and plenty of rainfall, which allowed their agriculture to thrive. So in these regions, the Southwest, Great Lakes, and Southeast, the Native Americans formed permanent villages thanks to their flourishing agriculture. In the Northeast and Mississippi River Valley and along the Atlantic seaboard, Native Americans were the ancient dual players in farming and hunting gathering. They developed a permanent settlements and thrived with a mixed economies. The Cahokia society in the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys peaked around 900 to 1250 CE. Imagine a mound over 30 meters high and 300 meters long. That's like a 10-story building. These mounds were residential platforms and occasionally ceremonial sites or burial sites. It was like having a skyscraper that doubled as your condo, your church, and well, your cemetery. The Mississippian culture inferred from these mounds and artifacts might have supported up to 40,000 people. They had social stratification, iron tools, and they also wore woven clothing. Talk about being ahead of the curve. Along the Atlantic coast, the Atlantic seaboard, tribes developed a brilliant planting method called three sister farming. So beans grew up the cornstalk trellises, and squash covered the mounds to retain soil moisture. It's like companion planting before it was cool. In the arid Great Basin and the western Great Plains, where rainfall was scarce, Native Americans adopted a mobile lifestyle. They were the original nomads, moving to sustain themselves. Forget your modern-day road trips. These guys lived on the move, chasing resources like pros. Meanwhile, in the Northwest and California, they thrived on hunting, gathering, and marine resources, developing settled communities along the coast. Think of it as beach living, Asian style. Sun, surf, and seafood. They had it all figured out. Picture this: Native Americans in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys were trade network engineers. They traded extensively across the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico and from the Appalachians to the Rockies. The dense river networks helped them trade across this vast area, and for Native Americans, stopping trade was like claiming wars. While for Europeans, it was just an inconvenience, like not finding your favorite brand at the supermarket. And by the way, Native Americans' trade items weren't just for practical use. They often had spiritual or symbolic significance. Think of it as trading Pokemon cards, but with way more meaning. In North America, Native American societies were relatively small scale without huge empires. Meanwhile, in Central and South America, it was a whole different ballgame. The Inca Empire in the Andes was like the Marvel cinematic universe of its time, sprawling, powerful, and densely populated. Around the 15th to 16th centuries, the Inca Empire boasted a population of up to 11.5 million, way more than all the Native Americans in North America combined. Instead of maize, the Incas thrived on potatoes, which grew beautifully in the high altitude Andes. Imagine living on a diet of French fries. Not too shabby, right? The Incas were road-building champs, creating an extensive network that used natural mountain ranges, avoiding large-scale earthworks. They were basically the original civil engineers, minus the hard hats. However, when the Spaniards arrived in the 16th century with superior military tech and diseases like smallpox, combined with internal civil wars, the empire collapsed faster than you can say Incan Empire. Now, let's not forget the Maya in Mesoamerica. These folks were the original math nerds and astronomers, developing terrace farming for their maize and even having their own writing system. But when the Spaniards came, they destroyed almost all Mayan books. Only 4 books survived, mostly recording astronomy and calendars. Then there's the Aztec Empire. Just as they were hitting their stride, in came the Europeans with their virus packages like an unwelcome software update that crashes your entire system. The Aztecs had a complex society, were quite wealthy, and even borrowed their calendar system from the Maya. But many of the records were destroyed by the Spaniards, who tried to erase Native Americans' local beliefs. Despite their advancements, the Aztecs had a few limitations. For instance, they didn't have large draft animals like horses or oxen, which were essential for agriculture and transportation. They also didn't develop real technology. The isolation of the Americas from other continents was a significant disadvantage. Unlike the Eastern Hemisphere, where critical technologies spread more quickly, like virus TikTok trends. So, while some of the Native Americans were incredibly advanced, they were also a bit like tech-savvy hermits who missed out on some crucial updates. Now, let's dive into the differences between Europeans and Native Americans in terms of religion, gender, land, and war. It's like comparing apples and oranges. If apples were into monotheism and oranges worshipped a whole fruit salad of deities. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europeans were all about monotheistic Christianity. It was the one God to rule them all mindset. Meanwhile, Native Americans worship various natural deities. Their religious life was more like a spiritual buffet. According to the Christian Bible, God gave Adam dominion over all animals and plants. Native Americans, on the other hand, had no concept of this dominion business and preferred to be buried with their own ancestors, creating a cozy family reunion in the afterlife. Europeans often misunderstood Native American rituals. The Native Americans sacrificial rituals as Satan worship. Meanwhile, Native Americans were scratching their heads over Europeans consuming their own god during the Eucharist. Wait, you eat your deity? They thought, and you think our rituals are weird? They found it hypocritical that Europeans who conducted witch hunts and executed heretics were shocked by their own practices. Gender roles were another area of stark contrast. Some Native American tribes had women in decision-making positions. In eastern woodland Indian communities, women were the farmers, while men hunted, fished, and fought. Farming was actually considered women's work, and historically, women might have been the first farmers globally. So when you munch on that salad, thank a lady farmer from ancient times. Most Native American societies were matrilineal and matrilocal, with women owning property and managing villages. Meanwhile, European women had little public role and few property rights, often stuck in the supporting role without even a speaking part in the grand play of life. Land use was also a major difference. Native Americans viewed land as sacred and sold only usage rights akin to leasing. It's like they were the original Airbnb hosts, but for entire landscapes. They relied on tradition to make decisions and had no concept of individual land ownership. Europeans, on the other hand, were like real estate agents with a fetish for paperwork. They used legal documents to establish ownership and treated land as a commodity, leading to conflicts when they claimed exclusive ownership in North America. It was like trying to play Monopoly with someone who thinks the board is a sacred artifact. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Native American warfare and how it differed from European methods. Native Americans were the original guerrilla warriors. They mastered the art of ambushes, using the natural landscape like experts, and avoided open battlefield confrontations, which they saw as a colossal waste of human resources. Why face your enemy head-on when you can surprise them from behind a tree? In contrast, Europeans loved a good old-fashioned showdown in open fields. Think of it as their version of a football game, but with more armor and fewer rules. The Europeans were like, let's meet at noon and settle this like gentlemen, while the Native Americans were like, we'll see you when you least expect it. In Mesoamerica, things got even wilder. Adult warriors were often sacrificed, and when Europeans arrived with their fancy firearms, Native Americans' conflicts intensified. The Iroquois, for example, had epic battles that turned regions like Ohio into depopulated zones. Because Native American warriors were so darn hard to catch, Europeans resorted to targeting women and children to demoralize and weaken native communities. It was a cowardly move, like going after the team's water boy instead of the star player. The Pequot War in the 1630s was a gruesome example, with the Pequot tribe nearly wiped out. It was a brutal reminder that sometimes history isn't just strange, it's downright tragic. So we've seen how Native American societies adapted to and transformed the environment, and how their ways differed from the Europeans. Now let's move on to the second part of the unit: European exploration in the Americas. While Columbus gets all the credit for discovering America, he only showed up in 1492. Fun fact, around the year 1000, Norse Vikings had already visited Greenland. and part of North America, including what we now call Canada. They even set up short-lived colonies, like the one in Newfoundland. Picture it, Eric the Red and his son Leif Erikson, the original father-son adventure duo. But harsh conditions and the lack of resources meant these Viking colonies were more like historical one-hit wonders. Fast forward 500 years, and Europeans were motivated to explore the Americas again, thanks to what I'd like to call the indirect discoverers. The Crusaders, after tasting the exotic spices of Asia, got Europe hooked on finding a cheaper route to Asia's wealth. Marco Polo's adventures to China in the 13th century further fueled this ambition. Though neither the Crusaders nor Marco Polo reached the Americas, their tales made them the hype man for European exploration. Take a look at this map of the world as known to Europeans before Columbus' 1492 voyage. They knew about lands east to East Asia and Southeast Asia, but the Pacific was a mystery. To the west, their knowledge extended to Greenland and West Africa. But the Atlantic was an uncharted ocean. It was like having a world map with a giant "Here be dragons" sign over the Atlantic, and Columbus was the guy brave or crazy enough to say, "Let's find out if that's true." Oceanic exploration was perilous and expensive, so what on earth caused Columbus and other Europeans to take this leap? It wasn't just a case of "I wonder what's over there." By the Renaissance in the 14th century, Europe experienced significant changes in thought. Think of the Renaissance as Europe's midlife crisis, but instead of buying sports cars, they nurtured an ambitious spirit of optimism and adventure. New technologies also emboldened Europeans. They included the development of gunpowder boom, the sailing compass, so they didn't get hopelessly lost, shipbuilding because you need something that floats, and map making so they could brag about their discoveries. The invention of the printing press in the 1450s facilitated the spread of knowledge, making exploration more feasible. It was the original social media. If social media were printed on paper and took weeks to spread news. European exploration was driven by a mix of religious, political, and economic motivations. Christianity, especially after the Protestant Reformation, emphasized missionary work. Imagine a giant celestial PR campaign, convert now, ask questions later. Religious conflicts in Europe also spurred a desire to spread their faith. In the 15th century, the Roman Catholic Church faced threats from Muslim Ottoman Turks and rebellious Christians. The union of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon created a unified Spain, boosting Catholic power and missionary zeal. It was like the original power couple launching a faith-based enterprise. The Protestant Reformation sparked a series of religious wars, with both Catholics and Protestants eager to spread their versions of Christianity. Think of it as the ultimate theological bake-off, with each side determined to win the grand prize of global influence. Monarchs of emerging nation-states like Spain, Portugal, France, and England sought to justify their rule and generate revenue through trade and church support. They were like, how can we make our kingdoms even cooler? I know. Let's discover some new real estate. Mercantilism, the new economic policy of the time, emphasized economic self-sufficiency and wealth accumulation through colonies and favorable trade balances. And the Ottoman Turks' blockade of traditional trade routes to Asia made Asian goods even more expensive, pushing Europeans to find new paths. Imagine trying to buy your favorite spices, but the price keeps going up, and then thinking, screw it, I'll just go get it myself. In summary, the combination of religious zeal, political ambitions, and economic policies and technological advancements spurred European exploration and colonization of the Americas. They didn't just wake up one day and decide to go on a road trip. It was a perfect storm of motivations that led them to set sail and change the world. Now that the Europeans were all pumped up to find new routes and explore new lands, let's chart their adventures. Imagine a race where everyone is trying to find the best shortcut to the treasure. Our trusty map has color-coded the early routes. Light purple for the Spanish, green for the Portuguese, orange for the French, and dark purple for the Dutch. The English, fashionably late as always, became significant in the 17th century, like their friend who shows up just in time for dessert. Let's zoom in let's zoom in on Columbus's escapades. Christopher Columbus hailed from Genoa, a coastal city-state in northwestern Italy, known for its strong navy and bustling trade scene. Imagine growing up in Genoa as Columbus did. It's like living in a shipping hub surrounded by sailors and merchants. Columbus was exposed to all kinds of trade-related gossip, sparking his interest in geography and literature. This curiosity led him to dream of sailing west to reach Asia, aiming to score big in the ancient markets. Columbus spent many years in Portugal, where he initially pitched his westward plan to the Portuguese monarchy, but the Portuguese, being skeptics of Columbus's geographical judgment, decided to focus on the eastward route around Africa to India. So they gave Columbus a polite but firm no thank you. Undeterred, Columbus turned to the Spanish monarchy. After years of persistency, he finally convinced Isabella and Ferdinand. So Spain, eager to outdo Portugal and enhance its wealth and status, decided to take a gamble on Columbus. Interestingly, Columbus's voyage was financed by Italian bankers, reflecting Spain's financial constraints and the need to share risks. It's like the original crowdfunding campaign, but with fewer tweets and more gold doubloons. Columbus eventually reached Guanahani Island, where he encountered the Taino people. He promptly renamed it San Salvador and called the Taino Indians, mistakenly thinking he had reached in Asia. Even though Columbus didn't find the expected gold, silk, or spices, he believed he was close to the Asian mainland. His return to Spain stirred immense interest, encouraging more Europeans to explore the Caribbean and American continents. This marked the end of isolation between the Western and Eastern hemispheres and the start of close contact. It was like the first season of a hit reality show. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. Despite Columbus never acknowledging that he hadn't reached Asia, his voyages increased tensions between Spain and Portugal. To avoid conflict, Pope Alexander VI proposed an imaginary dividing line in 1493, splitting the new lands between Spain and Portugal. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 moved this line westward, giving Portugal parts of modern Brazil. This treaty completely ignored indigenous claims, highlighting the arrogance of both nations. It's like two people arguing over who gets the last slice of pizza while the pizza itself just wants to be left alone. Meanwhile, France sponsored the Italian navigator Giovanni da Verrazzano's quest for a northwest passage to Asia. They were like, we need a shortcut. French explorer Jacques Cartier later ventured into eastern Canada, paving the way for France's colonization in North America and establishment of New France. However, internal conflicts delayed France's transatlantic efforts. The 16th century wars with Spain, Italy, and other European countries, coupled with religious conflicts between Catholics and Huguenots, kept France occupied. It was like trying to organize a road trip while your car is on fire. Finally, with the Edict of Nantes ending these religious wars, France, under the powerful monarchy of Louis XIV, developed a strong interest in overseas colonies in the 17th century. Louis XIV was like, let's get this colonial party started. The Dutch, gaining independence from Spain and in the late 16th century, were also latecomers to the Americas. As a significant maritime power, they engaged in extensive navigation and colonization in the late 16th and 17th centuries, establishing New Netherlands in what is now New York. The Englishman Henry Hudson, serving the Dutch, explored the Hudson River, Hudson Bay, and Hudson Strait, all named after him. It's like he was determined to leave his name on everything, like a teenager with a can of spray paint. England's initial foray into the New World included John Cabot's exploration of Newfoundland's coast in the late 15th century. However, significant religious conflicts in the 16th century delayed England's overseas exploration efforts. It's hard to focus on finding new lands when you are busy arguing about whose church hat is the fanciest. By the late 16th century, under Queen Elizabeth I, England began challenging Spanish dominance at sea, leading to successful colonization efforts in North America. Queen Elizabeth I was basically like, Spain, step aside, it's our turn now. By the 17th century, Europeans were all over the Americas like sprinkles on a donut. The British and Dutch grabbed chunks of the North American East Coast. The French controlled the northern and interior regions down to the Gulf of Mexico, and the Spanish ruled the American Southwest, Central America, and parts of South America. It was like a giant game of Risk, but with more boats and fewer dice. Each European power had its own colonial playbook with varying strategies and outcomes. The British were all about settling and farming. The French were into trading and making friends with the locals. The Spanish were focused on conquest and conversion. France and England were the entrepreneurial types, relying on private investors to bankroll their colonies. Think of them as the regional venture capitalists. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal went for the full royal treatment, with kings and queens directly controlling colonial affairs through viceroyals and royal courts. In the British North American colonies, despite the Crown's authority, colonists had their own assemblies and wielded significant influence over the appointment of royal governors. It was like a colonial version of Who Wants to Be Governor, with the colonists holding the final vote. The English aimed to populate their colonies with British settlers, leading to the displacement of Native Americans rather than integrating with them. The French, on the other hand, played nice, focusing on trade and missionary work rather than large-scale settlement. They were like the friendly neighbors who always brought over a casserole. The Spanish, meanwhile, went all out, establishing extensive colonial rule in Central and South America. Initially, Spanish colonists had a bit of independence, but by the late 16th century, they were firmly under the Crown's thumb, with little room for independent political institutions. Economically, the Spanish hit the jackpot with vast amounts of gold and silver, especially from Central and South America. This wasn't the case for the less resource-rich North American colonies. The Spanish imposed strict commercial policies, funneling all trade through a single Spanish port and a few colonial ports, which stifled economic development compared to the more commercially flexible British colonies. Spanish colonies had fewer European settlers, with a small ruling class lording over a large indigenous population. In contrast, British, Dutch, and French colonies quickly established permanent settlements and family life. Now let's dig into the third and last major topic of Unit 1, the impact of European colonization on the Americas. First, let's compare the interactions between different European countries and Native Americans. The Spanish were like strict landlords focused on Christianizing and exploiting Native Americans through forced labor and a rigid racial hierarchy. They were the landlords who never let you be late with rent and had a ton of rules. The French and the Dutch were more like friendly neighbors, developing strong trade relations. The English started off cooperative, but quickly moved to policies of displacement or extermination as differences emerged. They were the neighbors who started off with a friendly wave and ended with a property dispute. The Spanish wasted no time in conquering the Aztec Empire in Central America and the Inca Empire in South America. Thanks to their superior military technology and devastating diseases, these mighty civilizations crumbled faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. Large numbers of Native Americans perished, and survivors were forced into labor under the encomienda system. When diseases caused a labor shortage, Spain turned into African slaves through the hacienda system to fill the gap. Spanish colonies had a strict social hierarchy: pure-blooded Spaniards at the top, mixed heritage individuals in the middle, and Native Americans and Africans at the bottom. This exploitation led to resistance like the Pueblo Revolt in the late 17th century, which temporarily booted the Spanish out of New Mexico for over a decade. It took Spain nearly half a century to reclaim New Mexico fully. Eventually, the Spanish authorities made some concessions, allowing Native American traditions as long as they attended Mass. It was a bit like saying you can dance to your own tune, but only if you show up for Sunday choir practice. Meanwhile, Spain's Protestant rebels spread the Black Legend, a narrative exaggerating Spanish cruelty towards Native Americans. While there were elements of truth, it was an overgeneralization. Think of it as the 16th century version of a tabloid scandal, juicy but not entirely accurate. The French maintained better relations with Native Americans by focusing on trade rather than conquest. They swapped fur with firearms and alcohol, fostering relatively amicable relations. French missionaries, especially Jesuits, preferred peaceful conversion through example rather than force. They were like, we'll just lead by example and hope you follow along. After the Edict of Nantes ended religious wars in France, Catholicism remained the official religion, and Protestant emigration was restricted to avoid conflicts. The French in Quebec formed alliances with the Algonquins and Hurons. Ensuring their colonies' survival. The Dutch like the French, focused on trade alliances, but eventually got into violent conflicts with coastal natives. Their colonies were fewer, often located near trading posts along major rivers or the coast. The Dutch were like the cool, laid-back cousins who just wanted to set up shop and trade, but sometimes things got a little heated. The English in North America got a huge helping hand from Native Americans in the early days of colonization. Native Americans taught the clueless colonists how to grow corn, hunt in the forests, and find basic survival resources in harsh environments. It was like a survival reality show, but with real stakes. Picture Survivor Colonial Edition, where the prize is not dying of starvation, but the English, being the overachievers they were, had a stronger desire to settle in North America compared to other Europeans. They started adopting policies of displacement and land appropriation for growing tobacco and other cash crops, which naturally led to Native American resistance. Check out this illustration of the English settlement at Jamestown. They built strong palisades to protect their claimed land. Native tribes like the Powhatan weren't too thrilled and attacked colonial villages around Jamestown, killing hundreds of settlers. King Philip's War in the late 17th century highlighted the intense conflicts between Native Americans and English colonists. Although the colonists eventually defeated the Native Americans, the resistance inflicted severe blows on the English. And mutual retaliation led to brutal and merciless consequences for both sides. English colonies attracted people not only from England but also from other parts of Europe. After seizing land from Native Americans, the colonists focused on agriculture and lived separately from the native population. It was like setting up your own exclusive neighborhood and putting up a no trespassing sign. Religious differences added fuel to the fire. The English saw Native Americans as heathens, and gradually Puritans saw them as agents of the devil, threatening their godly society. On the flip side, Native Americans viewed the English as invaders who threatened their way of life. It was a cultural clash of epic proportions, with each side viewing the other as the ultimate party crasher. In summary, each European power had its own colonial playbook with varying strategies and outcomes, whether through friendly trade, strict control, or outright displacement. The European colonization of the Americas reshaped the continent and set the stage for centuries of change. Given the diverse colonial approaches and interests of Europeans, Native Americans had to get creative with their survival strategies. They formed alliances with different European powers to counteract their enemies. Imagine it as the ultimate season of survival America, with tribes in Mexico allying with the Spanish to resist the oppressive Aztecs, and Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley teaming up with the French to fend off English settlers. Another strategy was to migrate westwards to avoid European settlers, which often led to conflicts with tribes already residing in those regions. Tribal loyalty was strong, and Native Americans didn't see themselves as part of a larger unified group, but as members of distinct tribes. This lack of unity provided an advantage to European colonial expansion until the increasing threat from Europeans prompted a broader sense of North American identity. Alright, after discussing the diverse interactions between indigenous people and Europeans, let's dive into the Columbian exchange. This concept refers to the global spread of plants, food crops, animals, people, and disease pathogens following the arrival of Columbus and other European navigators in the Americas. Think of it as history's most intense potluck dinner, where everyone brought something to the table, and some of it was really bad for you. In terms of biological exchange, due to the relative independence of the eastern and western hemispheres before Columbus, many organisms evolved along different paths. With the Columbian exchange, these organisms began to establish connections. Infectious diseases brought catastrophic and devastating impacts on the indigenous people of the Americas, causing their population to plummet drastically. This can be considered the most severe population disaster in world history. In the 300 years after Europeans began maritime exploration, more than 100 million people might have died from diseases brought to the Americas and Oceania by Europeans. 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas perished within 100 years. Diseases like smallpox and measles had established some level of immunity in the Eastern Hemisphere, but the indigenous people of the Americas lacked these immune genes. In the Eastern Hemisphere, although these diseases were still spreading, the impact was relatively limited. They primarily harmed a certain number of infants and young children, but survivors acquired immunity through early exposure. As those who did not survive were mostly infants and young children, adults who contributed most to social and economic production were less affected. Therefore, the overall destructive power of these infectious diseases on society was limited. Epidemics combined with violent conflicts brought by Europeans reduced the indigenous population on the modern U.S. territory from at least 5 million in 1492 to 600,000 by 1800. By 1800, the European descended population in the U.S. was nearly 5 million, and there were about 1 million African descended people forcibly brought to America as slaves. 1 million European immigrants crossed the ocean to North America during the 17th and 18th centuries, creating a population landscape completely different from that of 1492. The densely populated areas were hit hardest by epidemics. For example, the Aztec Empire's population plummeted from about 17 million to 1.3 million in a century, while Spanish colonists imposed their empire on the devastated Mexican society. The impact of viruses and epidemics on the indigenous population was a key factor in the European invaders' expansion in the Americas. This point was humorously and poignantly emphasized in the 2018 stand-up show John Leguizamo's Latin History for Morons, where comedian John Leguizamo highlights the existence of infectious diseases in European colonization of the Americas. It's like the universe threw in a cheat code for the Europeans, but at a massive cost to the indigenous peoples. After the indigenous population drastically decreased, the Americas were like a massive empty farm with too few laborers to till the soil. Consequently, the Portuguese and other Europeans started importing enslaved African labor to the Americas. This not only had a huge impact on Africa's population and economy, but also introduced a workforce that would shape the future of agriculture in the New World. Later, when Europeans reached Pacific Islands, they brought similar but relatively smaller scale devastating impacts on the island natives. This dual approach of virus plus violence by Europeans caused immense suffering for indigenous people in the Americas and Pacific Islands. It's a tragic chapter in history that reads more like a horror story than a historical text. From a long-term and global perspective, although infectious diseases caused population decline, the Columbian exchange ultimately increased rather than decreased the world's population due to the global spread of edible plants and animals. On one hand, the widespread dissemination of edible species made people's diets generally more nutritious, contributing to continued world population growth. Imagine the world's biggest potluck where everyone brought their best dishes. Wheat and sugar from Eurasia made their way to the Americas, while Africa contributed yams, okra, kale, and coffee. High protein and high fat food sources like dairy products and livestock from Europe significantly increased food energy supply in the Americas. Many crops were also transmitted from the Americas to the Eastern Hemisphere. Corn and potatoes were like the original superfoods, significantly increasing calorie intake in the Eurasian continent. Corn became a superhero in agriculture, thriving in places unsuitable for rice and millet in China. Potato arrived like an energy bomb in Europe and Africa, becoming an important staple food and boosting population growth. These crops were the MVPs of the global diet revolution. Additionally, juicy tomatoes, flavorful peppers, fragrant papaya, and sweet pineapples enriched Eurasian diets with colors and fresh tastes. Besides the joy on the palate, there was also the medicinal plant quinine from South America. As the first effective treatment for malaria, quinine was like a miracle drug for malaria patients and a crucial survival aid for European colonizers in tropical regions. Aside from edible plants and animals, some introduced species like horses significantly changed the hunting practices of the Plains Indians in the Americas. Horses turned hunting into a highly specialized and dangerous activity, allowing hunters to cover larger areas and chase faster prey. From the Americas, tobacco was introduced to the Eastern Hemisphere. Initially advertised as a health product, when brought back to Europe, tobacco is now known as a health killer, with a quarter of smokers worldwide dying from smoking-related causes. It's a classic case of short-term pleasure, long-term health consequences. The exchange of plant and animal species between the hemispheres also brought invasive species problems. For example, dandelions from Europe, with their superpowers, occupied open and wasteland areas in the Americas, crowding out native plants and becoming a supervillain in American agriculture, impacting crop growth and increasing breeding costs. And pigs, introduced by Europeans, thrived in suitable environments without natural predators, rapidly forming wild populations in the Caribbean, like on Barbados Islands. These wild pigs competed for food resources with native wildlife, reducing the numbers of some local species. The Columbian Exchange wasn't just about swapping plants and animals. It was like his history's greatest yard sale, competing with crucial technologies and tools. Picture this: the real roads in Americas, and suddenly transportation is a breeze, like the original Uber, but without surge pricing. Iron farming tools like plows, hoes, and sickles made agricultural productivity soar, turning small farms into mega farms. And then there's gunpowder technology brought by Europeans, which added a whole new dimension to conflicts, like introducing fireworks to a rock, paper, scissors game. greatly altering the military landscape of Native American societies. The Columbia Exchange also introduced the movement of people, both voluntary and forced migrations. Europeans settled in the Americas, and Africans were forcibly brought by Europeans to perform various labor tasks. Africans brought important farming knowledge and significantly influenced American music with their rhymes and singing styles, laying the foundation for much of the music we love today. Meanwhile, Europeans, to justify slavery, cited biblical passages and developed theories claiming biological inferiority of Africans, making this enslavement acceptable. It was the worst kind of creative writing class. Colonization in the Americas also significantly impacted Europe, primarily in the transition from feudal system to capitalist economies. New crops provided more food sources and nutrition, boosting European population growth. It was like Europe suddenly discovered a magic pantry that never ran out. The wealth of minerals from Central and South America made the Iberian states rich, like swimming in gold coins rich. The increased trade and the development of joint stock companies laid the foundation for subsequent financial and commercial prosperity. Basically, Europe hit the jackpot and it changed the game forever. In summary, the history of the first 100 years after Europeans arrived in the Americas is like Europeans opening a massive blind box. The first part is about the indigenous lifestyle before opening the blind box. The second part is about why and how Europeans opened the blind box. And the third part is about the consequences after opening the blind box. And there you have it for Unit 1. See you next time.